The river keeps its own book. It writes in mud and drift and ice, crossing out a name when it must, underlining a fault line with a freshet, and then going on. My skiff was a slim line in that book, pole marks down the margin. Folks call me Harlan most days, Ferryman, when they wanted the work without the man. I answered to both and kept the ledger under the seat, the paper gone soft from damp, the pencil tied with twine so it wouldn't roll off into the current. I ran the Willow Ford, where the cottonwoods lean in and chatter like women on wash day. To the west lay the Kincaid spread, long fences strung tight as a jaw. To the east lay the Reyes allotment, lower ground, flood-bent grass, an orchard stitched out of stubbornness and prayer. Between them ran my living and their quarrel. I remember that day by the smell of iron in the water. A summer storm had passed 2 nights before, and the river wore its temper still, brown and fast under a sky burnished like old coin. I worked the pole slow, feeling the skiff talk in little shivers. A woman with a sack of flour, a boy with eggs wrapped in sawdust, a ranch hand holding a new bridle like a promise. Each made the short trip and paid in coins. Tobacco, a jar of last year's peaches. I wrote it all down. A ledger keeps trust when tongues go hot. There had been talk, same as always. The Kincaid cattle pushed down to drink where the bank cut easy. The Reyes irrigation ditch bit another inch from the bend. Words became shouts at the mercantile. The sheriff's clerk noted a complaint in a thin hand and suggested both parties let the courts see it after harvest. Men made jokes about law arriving with the first snow and leaving with the last. It was late afternoon when Jesse Reyes came down to the east bank. I knew him by his father's walk, though Jesse carried himself easier, like he was built for talking across tables instead of over rifle sights. He had a tin cup and a small notebook, and sat on a trunk of driftwood, knees up, boot heels planted in wet sand. He dipped the cup, drank, and then wet his pencil and began to write. He wrote slow, the sort of slow that isn't laziness but care. A man weighing each line like a nail before he sets it. The wind put the smell of cottonwood sap in my nose. Jesse paused, crossed out a word with the side of the pencil, and tried again. I worked 2 more crossings with a wagon and a stray bull calf that got its forelegs in and brayed like it was being baptized against its will. When I pulled back, Jesse still sat there, the paper held with a thumb against the driftwood. "Evening," I said. He nodded without looking up. "Evening, Harlan." The name sat on his tongue like he'd decided not to add "sir" to it. That told me how he saw me, neighbor, not hire. He set down the notebook and blew a thin vein of river water from the tin cup over the page, so the pencil marks settled darker. "River ink," he said. "It stays better." "Depends what you want to keep," I said. He smiled briefly. It made him look younger than his 20-some years. Up on the ridge, thunder mumbled in its sleep. "You ferrying again after sundown?" he asked. "I go while there's work and light," I said. "Sometimes a bit after when both argue with each other." He closed the notebook and wrapped it in oilcloth. There was a little wax seal already pressed on one corner, cheap and uneven, impressed with the face of a dime. He held it a moment longer than he needed to. "It's a letter for Alma Kincaid," he said. "Not her father, not her brothers. Her." I watched a raft of foam spin and break apart against my pole. "You sure that's where it belongs?" "Yes," he said, "and no one else will take it. Not to their porch, not into her hands." "That family would sooner spit than pay me a nickel," I said. "Then let me pay for them," he replied. Easy, as if the answer was a shelf he knew by heart. He pulled a $1 from his pocket and set it on my plank seat. It wasn't much, and it wasn't nothing. It was the way he put it, flat, no tremble, that pinned me to listen. "What's in the paper?" He looked at the river instead of me. "An old wrong. Mine enough I can name it. Hers enough I can't hold it all." After a breath, he added, "2 families are standing to meet at the cottonwoods come dawn. I can't say the word parlay without feeling foolish. But I can say I don't want to be the man who makes coffins the first work of the day. He didn't lift his chin for effect. He didn't need to. The faint shake in his hands when he tied the twine back around the oilcloth said enough. He feared not the crossing, not the Kincaid porch, but the fact of words once let loose. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you don't belong to either house," he said, "and because you carry things across that would drown if they tried it alone." I could have said no. My rules were plain. No freight after dark without notice. No business that looked like a fight in paper clothes. No Kincaids unless they left their talk of rights at the bank. Then again, a river has its own teeth, and it didn't need my rules to chew up men when pride led them in. I picked up the dollar and wrote his name in my ledger. The pencil left a gray groove where the page had gone pulpy. I blew on it out of habit. "Not for the crossing," I said, "for the risk you're asking me to stand in." He waited. "I'll take it," I said, "but I'm not walking it to their door." He nodded. "Leave it with Alma, if she's at the trough, or the pasture, or the kitchen stoop. If it's another Kincaid, ask that they place it on her breadboard. I wrote it so she'll know by the way I begin." "How do you begin?" "Alma," he said, "plain and no title. We were children before we were mouthpieces." I stowed the letter in a tin lard pail I kept for permits and marriage papers, and once a song written on the back of an invoice. I pressed the lid tight. "You know what you're doing?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I know what I'm stopping." A hawk cut a wide circle overhead. Its shadow passed across Jesse's face and then across mine, light again on both of us as it drifted on. By the time the sun leaned down against the far hills, the river had lost its iron smell and picked up damp earth and a little rot. Frogs started their long conversation. I ferried a pair of sisters with baskets of clean shirts. They talked low about a dance being planned if peace held through harvest. I ferried a blacksmith's apprentice who carried a length of chain on his shoulder and asked me if I'd seen the new colt down at Moses' place. I said I hadn't and promised to look. A day is mostly built of promises you think you can keep. The Kincaid side grew quiet. No riders along the fence, no dog running the line. That kind of quiet carries a weight to it when the last weeks have been loud. I had a lantern lashed near the prow, but I didn't light it. Light can bring comfort or aim. I kept to the darker edge of evening. Jesse stayed until nearly full dark, as if sitting there helped hold the world while decisions were being made elsewhere. He asked me once, without looking up, if I ever wrote letters. "I put words in the ledger," I said. "That's letter enough." "Ledger's a kind of letter to tomorrow," he said. "Says who owes who what. It also says who did right by today," I said, and that ended it. He rose finally and dusted off his trousers. He didn't offer a hand. We weren't friends in the way that tested a shake. He just nodded as though we'd parted 10 times already in the same hour, and nothing could go wrong for lack of words. I waited until his boot steps faded, and the moon came up, a thin cut of bone over the ridge. I checked the skiff, ran my hand along the gunwale where the pine had swollen, then settled again like an old scar. I tied down the pail and set the pole. The first push-off, when the bank lets go and the river takes over, is a small surprise no matter how many years you do it. The kind that wakes you behind the eyes. Mid-channel, the current grabbed me harder. I set my feet wider and worked the pole deep, letting the river tell me how much it would permit and how much it insisted on. A log moved like a tired alligator, slow and certain. I nudged it with the pole and let it pass downstream. On the west bank, a calf bawled once and was hushed by a voice I could not see. The Kincaid house sat on a slight rise, its windows dull coins in the dark. Outbuildings square as playing cards planted in dirt. Between the main house and the barn was a path beaten by years of feet that refused each other's thresholds. I felt seen, though I saw no one. That's another kind of ledger, the one a family keeps in shadows. I grounded the skiff on sand and held the pole like a staff. I was not walking to their door. I told Jesse that. A figure emerged from the barn side, small and firm-moving. She had a bucket, and the handle clicked against the iron hoop in time with her step. "Evening," I said, voice level. She set the bucket down on a stump and studied me. Moonlight made a pale seam along her cheekbone. "Evening, Ferryman," she said. "You're off your hour." "I am when asked," I said. "I have a paper meant for Alma Kincaid." "You found her," she said. The word "her" held no pride and no apology. She wiped her hands on her skirt and stood as if she'd been told worse news and better in the same breath. "I was told to put it on your breadboard if I couldn't find you," I said. "You found me," she said again, as though keeping me from an extra step counted as a kindness she could afford. She came closer, till I could see a faint crease in her brow like she'd frowned often as a child, and it never fully left. "I'll leave it by your bucket," I said, setting the tin pail on the stump between us. "I don't carry messages past the place I stand." "That suits," she said. She didn't reach at once. She looked at the pail as though it might hum. "Is it a bill or a blessing?" "Depends how you read it," I said. "It's sealed with a dime, which argues for thrift and luck both." "I'll take both," she said, and now she did lift the lid and drew out the oilcloth with fingers neat as a schoolteacher's. She felt the weight, not heavy at all, and maybe that was the worry, how little can change so much. From the house came a male shout, too far to catch words, close enough to taste the temper. Alma folded the letter into her apron pocket. "They'll ask who brought it," she said. "You could tell them a man across water sent words instead of lead," I said. "And a ferryman carried what wouldn't swim." "That might be worse," she said, and there was the faintest smile, dark humor used like a lantern with the wick turned low. She dipped her head, a plain bow. "Thank you." I pushed off before I had to hear who called next. The skiff slid like a shadow unbuttoned from the bank. I didn't light the lantern until I was back in the deeper run, and then only long enough to see the rip between two eddies and aim straight. On the east side, I pulled the skiff up and tied off twice, once to a root and once to a stake. A man sleeps better with two knots on nights like that. I sat on the plank seat and opened my ledger. I wrote, "Carried paper at dark, $1, and left a long blank line before the word delivered. It wasn't mine to fill yet. I kept the skiff by the water's edge and the pole at hand. The moon climbed and made a pale road down the middle of the river, as if even the sky wished to show a path. Out in that light, drift sprigs turned and bumped and went on. Somewhere, a coyote marked himself by sound. Close by, the reeds ratcheted, as if counting. I thought of Jesse's face when he'd said, "Children." How it goes, the way people once were together, before surnames hardened like plaster. I thought of Alma, the crease in her brow, the steady hands on the bucket and on the letter, the way she had not asked if it came from Jesse, because she knew and also needed to read it to be sure. The river, being what it is, made no promises, but the sound of it slowed a little toward midnight, as though breathing out. Trouble can get tired when a town holds still long enough. I set my palm against the gunwale one more time and felt the swollen wood ease under the night. Wind ran lightly through the cottonwoods, and they answered and then were quiet. I capped the lantern and let dark rest on the bank again. Dawn was hours off. I watched the water right, and I waited for what it would say when morning laid a clean line across both shores. I woke once to the sound of hooves, ghosting the west ridge, and once to the dry snap of a twig near the east reeds. The river kept its whisper, and I kept my hand near the pole. I don't like to guess at shadows, but I counted 2 on the Kincaid side by the shape they made when they stopped to smoke. They weren't hiding as much as practicing it. A lantern winked from the Kincaid porch, short and twice, like a blink you'd mistake if you weren't waiting. Then a third, longer. I had seen that rhythm before in lambing season, when a shepherd sends for the midwife without rousing men who wake as if insulted by night work. I didn't answer with light. I pulled my ledger and made a new page. On the top line I wrote, "Parlay toll, paid." Then I tore the stub tidy and slid it into my pocket with the dime-sealed scrap I'd saved from another wedding. Paper isn't law, but it gathers witnesses like burrs. The moon had the good manners to lower itself. Night set its elbows down. I walked the bank with the lantern hooded and checked the rope on the upstream anchor. If the current rose, I could swing the skiff to midstream and hold it there like a table between two men. I tested the bowline with my weight. The knot creaked and held. Bootsteps on the east path warned before the man did. He kept to the grass and came up slow. It was Moses the blacksmith, shoulders broad under a coat that had known better thirds. He stopped 10 paces off and tapped 2 fingers on his cap brim. "Couldn't sleep," he murmured. "Thought I'd stand where a man's work is measured in straight lines." "River doesn't give those," I said. "No," he said, "but you do." He looked at the skiff, then at my hands. "You planning to ferry at dawn?" "I'm planning to keep folk from falling in while they choose what name they want on their next child," I said. Moses grunted, the kind of sound a man makes when something heavy sits right at last. He held out a slip of wood with 2 signatures burnt into it with a nail heated red. "Midwife Ellis and I put our names to a custom," he said. "Neutral ground at the mid-bar, no guns shouldered while talking. You lay that plank across your thwarts, we'll say the town set a table." "Who told you there'd be a talk?" I asked. He smiled in the dark. "Nobody has to tell me water is wet." He left the plank and went. His steps clicked once on a stone, and then he was only a darker piece of dark. I laid the plank across the skiff and ran my hand over the nail-burnt names. Ellis. Letters were tidy and unafraid. Moses crooked some, stubborn more. I was capping the lantern when the reeds whispered, and a figure came low and quiet along the east bank. Alma didn't stand full up until she was within a whisper. "I read it," she said, voice soft as a hinge oiled late. "Twice, 3 times now. I keep failing in different places." "What did you fail?" I asked. "To stay angry," she said. "To stay young." She had the letter in her hand, folded, then folded again till it was as narrow as a tally stick. He wrote about the day at the ditch. He wrote about the horse spooking, and the boy under it. He wrote what he feared and what he did not do. There's a line in there that cut me open and then stitched me up. She didn't offer the line, and I didn't ask. Some words belong to the person they save until they're ready to share them. She kept her gaze on the black, as if there were pages still turning there. "They'll meet at the cottonwoods," she said. "My father said he'll speak law with any man who comes empty-handed. My brother said empty hands are for beggars. I told them if they carry rifles, I'll carry the letter, and we'll see which one talks straightest." "You want me to ferry you?" I asked. "Not tonight," she said, "but at first, if the men get ahead of sense, I might need a crooked path to cut the straight line they're drawing." She looked at the plank with the burned names. "I see you set a table." "The town did," I said. "I'm only the man with the board." "That's what a table is," she said. "A board and a promise." She stepped back into the reeds without a rustle. I stood listening to the shape of that word promise until the river had said it enough times that I believed it belonged in my ledger too. Closer to dawn, a wind came down the channel with the clean on it. It lifted the edge of my coat and made the pole clack once against the gunwale. The east took a breath. The west answered. There was a time when a boy could catch that first color with his hands and claim it for himself. Men forget the trick. From the Reyes side, I could hear murmuring, not arguing, murmuring, like a prayer said sideways. I recognized Jesse's voice, low and level, and his father's, heavier, pushing against it, not to break it, but to see if it would hold. On the west, a door slammed, and a man cursed the hinge for telling on him. Somewhere between, a rooster squandered his news early. I brought the skiff around and tied her nose to the upstream stake. The current pressed against the side, impatient as a mule. I untied the stern and walked her out so the bow held and the stern swung free. In mid-channel, the rope stretched and sang a little. This is as good a place as any to take a long drink if you've got water handy. If you've been sitting a spell, roll your shoulders once and ease your jaw. The day will feel more merciful for it. Light came like a man unlocking a door with a key he hasn't used in years. The first slat showed a strip of cottonwood leaves. The next showed the line of the west fence, and the next showed faces I had known since they were new. On the western bank, two Kincaid brothers stood with rifles held easy at hip height, not aimed, not slung. Their father wasn't in sight. Alma stood among the men like a pin that held a map steady. She wasn't between them. She was simply where they had to look if they wanted to see the river. On the eastern bank, the Reyes men gathered by their ditch spade, the long-handled kind that makes a man learn patience. Jesse had no rifle. He wore a hat too big for him, a sign he had borrowed sense from someone older or wanted to. His mother stood with a hand pressed flat to a folded shawl, as if warming a book. "Morning," I said, because weather words are the only ones you can spend without changing the price of the day. "Morning," Alma answered. Her voice carried, even though she didn't raise it. The older Kincaid brother raised his chin like a challenge and then lowered it when he saw me looking. Jesse stepped to the waterline and held both hands out, palms bare. That was not customary, but it was right. Alma's brothers twitched, and then stilled, as if they'd remembered being boys told to mind their coats at church. I put my weight into the pole and eased the skiff to the mid-bar, where gravel showed itself in a narrow, glistening back. The current fussed, but let me put the bow on that small certainty. I set the plank with the burned names across the thwarts and left my ledger open on it to show there was a place to write what would be owed and to whom. "No man carries a shoulder gun onto this board," I said. "No woman is spoken over. No boy is named liar for speaking plain. That's the town's rule today." The older Kincaid brother made a show of laughing at the word rule, and then set the butt of his rifle on the ground and put both hands over the muzzle like a pilgrim who didn't know he was one. The younger glanced at Alma and followed. Jesse stepped to the bow of the skiff and stopped. He looked at me the way a man looks at the priest before he says the first line of a confession, not for absolution but for affirmation that he had come to the right room. I nodded at the plank. "Mind your feet," I said. "There are names on that wood." He crossed and stood in the middle, shoes wet with river sheen. He took the letter from his vest and set it on the ledger like a coin on a plate. Alma did not move. The river held its breath. Out of sight, someone's cow shook its head and the bell clanked once. "I wrote wrong," Jesse said, eyes on Alma and then down. "Not about what happened, but about what I let happen. I wrote it to you because you were there before the men were. You were there with a rope and a hand on that colt's eye, and I was there with a mouth full of judgment." He breathed, and the sound of it went all the way across both banks. I said the Reyes ditch cut the bank. It was the colt's fear that cut me. I let our name do the talking for me the rest of the year. Alma didn't cross. She didn't look at her brothers. She looked at the letter, then at the penciled word delivered on my ledger page that waited empty. She touched the paper with 2 fingers and didn't lift it. "My father told me last winter that forgiveness is a tool that stays sharp if you never pick it up," she said. "He said the other man's throat is too far to reach anyway." She tilted her head slightly, listening to a thing that wasn't the river. "I'll not be made a hinge between fools, but I'll open my hand if yours is empty." The younger Kincaid brother shifted. A boy's signal caught late in a man's body. He looked at Jesse's hands. He looked at Alma's. He let his rifle ease to the crook of his arm and away from anything that could be mistaken for aim. The older brother sucked a bit of air through his teeth. "We lost a steer last week," he said, as if that could stand in for an opening prayer. "We pulled a boy from under a horse," Jesse said, "and it was not a one-up but a measuring." He lifted the letter again and held it toward her without stepping off the plank. "I wrote a line about the ditch," he said. "I offered something there." Alma's eyes stayed on his face while her hand took the paper. She unfolded it once, twice, thrice, until the cheap wax edge showed. She read in silence for a count I marked with the river's small throat clearings around the bow. "My father will hate this line," she said at last. "My brothers more." "I wrote it to make a thing they could hate smaller than the thing they could love," he said. "A fence mended where the water bites. A gate unlocked where calves drift lost. Me first to do it, and first to be laughed at, if that buys us a season. She folded the letter with care. You think a ditch can hold back a habit? She asked. I think a ditch can teach one, he said, if it runs true long enough. The older Kincaid brother made a scoffing sound, that wishbone somewhere between pride and fear. What does the Reyes boy pay? He said. What coin gets laid down? Jesse reached into his pocket and set the single dollar on the plank where the names burned. He left his hand on it for a heartbeat, as if the wood had to feel it to make it count. $1 to end the sale, he said, voice steady. The sale where we've been selling each other short. It wasn't fine rhetoric. It was a fence post knocked true. Moses, who had come up silent to the east bank, grunted in a way that meant a man had said enough and could stop. Alma looked at the dollar. She put the letter on my ledger and set her palm over both. I'll bring a shovel, she said. My brothers will bring their eyes. My father will bring his stubbornness. She turned her head to the west without moving her feet. You'll bring your open hands. On the west bank, a rider had come from the house, older, carried straight. Mr. Kincaid reined in at the cottonwoods and saw his son standing without rifle's shoulder. He saw his daughter with her hand on a piece of paper and money. He saw me with the ledger open on a board with 2 names burned in. What is this? He said, the question heavy with years and the habit of being answered. Alma did not raise her voice. Breakfast, she said. A table, a rule. Kincaid's mouth tilted like a man about to choose a fight small enough to win so he can keep from facing the larger one he'll lose. He set his boot in the dust and swung down without hurry. He hooked his fingers in his belt, and that way men use when they want their hands to look harmless. He came as far as the waterline and no farther. He was too proud to step onto anything that could tip. He looked at Jesse with the flat, measuring eyes of a cattleman buying feed. Then he looked at the dollar and the letter as if numbers had been carved into them. Who witnesses, he asked, if a man lays down a rifle and is made a fool of? Town does, I said. Midwife Ellis, Moses by the forge, Harlan the ferryman, the river if none of us make it to fall. He sniffed. Men forget to respect the last witness until they're staring up through it. He didn't answer me. He looked at Alma, and whatever he said in his head burned there and cooled. He lifted his hand and flattened it in the air, palm down. He didn't say lower your guns. He said it without words, and the brothers obeyed a thing older than their temper. Jesse kept his hands open. Alma kept her palm on the paper. I put my pencil to the ledger and waited for the shape of the morning to give me the last word to write. The sun climbed clean and made the river look younger than it had in years. Dew smoked off the grass. A jay fussed in the cottonwoods, as if even a bird wanted its say in what was being set. The Kincaid brothers loosened their shoulders, rifles resting against their boots. On the other bank, Jesse's father still gripped his ditch spade, knuckles white, but the blade stayed in dirt, not air. I marked a page in my ledger and let the silence write first. A river teaches that let the water speak before you try your own tongue. Alma lifted the letter again. She didn't wave it, didn't make it a banner. She read a line out loud slow enough that each word found its place. We men wear water bites and we keep watch where calves drift lost. Her voice held no tremble. It was the way one says grace before bread. Mr. Kincaid's jaw tightened, but he didn't cut her off. The older son shifted, looked at his boots and muttered, Fence is broke near the bend anyhow. It wasn't a concession, but it was a start. A man admitting work needs doing is the nearest cousin to peace. Jesse spoke next. I'll set post today. My brothers will carry cedar from the East Ridge. If any Kincaid will meet me there, we'll drive nails straight. His father grunted. It could have meant no, could have meant don't be a fool, but he didn't stop him. And in a feud, silence can be the first mercy. Alma's eyes went to her father. You'll not stand alone in this, she said. You'll not make us beggars for wanting rest instead of war. She pressed the letter flat against the plank, as if pinning down a restless bird. I'll bring the bread. and I'll stand where I can see both banks." Her father studied her like a man studies a map he doesn't trust. Then he said, quiet but plain, "A woman's word holds only if men let it." Alma didn't blink. "Then let it," she said, "or watch the town let you go hungry when no one comes to mend what breaks." The younger brother smothered a laugh in his hand. Even the river seemed to chuckle, knocking driftwood against the bank. Mr. Kincaid scowled, but not at her, at the sound of something larger than his will moving. I wrote a single word in the ledger, agreed. Not law, not signed, but heavy as stone. From the east, Jesse's mother called out, "Breakfast is cooling." Ordinary words, but they broke the grip of old anger better than sermons. A man can't eat hate on an empty stomach. One by one, rifles were slung harmlessly across shoulders. The ditch spade went flat on the ground. Alma folded the letter and put it back in her apron. She looked at Jesse once. Not long, not shy, just enough to mark the moment. The plank with the burned name stayed steady even as the current fussed around it. I closed my ledger and pressed the dime seal Jesse had used into the soft page, leaving a coin's faint circle. Proof enough for me. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, both families had stepped back from the water. No one shook hands. No one embraced. They didn't need to. They walked toward their fences, their ditches, their stock. The work waited, and work is the best peace there is. I poled the skiff back to shore, the plank still across the thwarts. When I lifted it, my hand smelled of scorched wood and iron. Moses and Ellis, names burned into place. The table had been set and used, and for one morning at least, no blood soaked the boards. Alma lingered at the bank, bucket in hand. She looked at me. "Will you keep that in your ledger?" "I will," I said. "Then it's real," she said, and turned toward the house. Jesse gave a nod from across the current. His father didn't see it, or pretended not to. That nod wasn't for kin, nor for law. It was for the ferryman who carried what couldn't swim and set it down where it might grow. The river moved on. It always does. But that morning it carried fewer grudges and more chance of calves safe at pasture. That's as close to victory as two families could ask. The river remembers. It keeps its minutes in silt and its verdicts in stone. I set down that morning's page with the word delivered, and for once it didn't feel like bookkeeping. It felt like a seed pressed into earth. No songs were sung, no treaties signed, just rifles lowered, a fence promised mended, a letter folded into an apron. But quiet things last if they're carried right. By dusk, the town spoke of rain and crops instead of coffins, and that was enough. When I pulled across again that night, the current sounded easier, like it had been unburdened. I closed the ledger, tied it with twine, and told myself, a ferryman doesn't judge the weight of what he carries, only makes sure it reaches the far shore. Thank you for sitting with this story by Lanternlight. If it's spoken to you, I invite you to stay a while with our Frontier Letter series. More tales rest in the current, waiting to be carried across.